Hi, folks, and welcome to the Empowered Leaders in Tech podcast. I am super thrilled to be sharing Nicki Tinson with you. So I've known Nicki for probably about 6 months now. She is an incredibly determined and passionate business intelligence manager at Smart Fleet Solutions. She's also the founder of Empowered Analysts, which is a fantastic program that you should definitely check out. So I would really love to welcome you today, Nicki. So thank you for sharing your career story and all the great work that you do with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I feel like I've known you for so much longer than 6 months. And I think, watching some of the things that you've done, there's so much that's really in alignment, I think, for me around the way, the journey you've been on as well. So it's great to be able to come and share that today.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely crossover, and you find this, don't you? The same values when you start to meet people valuing the same things and having the same struggles, particularly as women in the data sector, around having a family and having all these other things, the commitments that have got going on, but still being incredibly career focused.
Yes, absolutely.
So I guess I know quite a bit about your career now, and we've exchanged lots of stories about working in the BI sector. But what would be really good is to understand the start of your journey, where it all began, and did you always want to end up in BI and doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, so it's been such an interesting journey, and I always like kind of being able to reflect on it because didn't plan to be a BI manager. I don't know even whether they existed when I was at school.
No,
It was not a
same here.
career that was an option, which I guess shows you how far the industry's come. It's still very young in lots of ways. So I had a very clear path in my head. We're all asked what we want to do when we grow up, when we're younger, and we have to have an answer. And if you don't have an answer, it's like, oh my goodness, everyone's panicking around you. Mine was fairly clear. I was very vocationally driven. My mum was actually a nurse, and I think I was very inspired by that kind of caring for people and helping people in some way. And so my plan was to get into educational psychology. So I was really interested in working with children, and like really helping them to flourish really. And you sort of see children who haven't had the best start in life or have had some challenges, and that really kind of resonated with me around being able to kind of help people be the best of themselves despite some of the challenges they may have come up against. And so that was a really great career path for me. Went to university, did psychology and English. My psychology degree, I had to do certain modules. So it was all very clear, there was this linear thing, like I know you talk about this, and this linear path. And after it, the plan was that I had to do 2 years of teaching, do a PGCE, do 2 years of teaching, and then do a master's in educational psychology. So great,
Okay.
great plan, right?
Quite a commitment, that is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking what, a total of 7 years? So three.
Yeah.
How long was your degree? So
Yeah, 3-year degree, a year teaching, at least 2 years. A year PGCE, at least 2 years of teaching, and then an MA. And I remember a friend at university who wanted to do something similar, kind of going, I wonder what would you do if it doesn't work out? And I remember saying, absolutely, this is going to work out. Like nothing, what could possibly go wrong? This is what I'm doing. No one's going to stop me. I'm going to do this. And I absolutely, funnily enough, I absolutely loved the teaching, really loved my PGCE, loved that connection with children, really growing them, building that relationship with them. And essentially what happened at the end of my PGCE was there was a huge kind of budget mix up, I guess is the best way of saying it, in government. And a lot of people didn't get jobs. There were a lot of redundancies that year, which is quite rare in teaching. So anyone new coming into it was really struggling to get a job, compared to usual. And so I ended up not getting a job. And so I was like, it was a shock because I was very clear on why I wanted to do this. And I didn't have a job, and obviously there's like the income and like what do I do, and the supply teaching was very few and far between. And so I had this really difficult, uncomfortable year. I'd kind of gone through university with a lot of, you come out with all this debt at the end of it. And now I don't even have this guaranteed job, right? So it was meant to be a guaranteed job. And it was just like a complete tailspin for me. And it's, yeah, so I kind of really struggled with my mental health that year, because I guess I came up very early in my career to what potentially we're all fearful of, which is to not have a job. That's the thing we're all trying to make sure doesn't happen. And in a weird way, I think it's really beneficial. It was really beneficial for me to go through that then, because I had to come to terms with the fact that sometimes life doesn't work out how you plan it to. And that my value as a human being it didn't make me any less just because I didn't have the job that I planned to get. And so I came to terms with that, or kind of confronted that very, very early on.
Did you at the time, or is that something that now retrospectively you can look back and be quite philosophical about it, but at the time were you a little bit bitter and angry, or did you come to terms with that quite quickly and think, no, I still made the right decisions, I'm still a good person, I'm still worthy? And talk me through how that made you feel.
That's a really good question. So no, it took me a while. I think it felt really unfair that it had happened, because, and I got such amazing feedback from one of the ladies, well, one of the women who ran the PGCE, and she, I'd sort of stayed in touch with people afterwards, and so I met up with her once, and she said, of all the people on the course, you were one of the strongest, I can't believe you haven't got a job, and etc. Which was obviously meant in a really nice way, but it's then like, why haven't I got a job?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you are, but when something like that comes up, I would start to self-doubt myself and think, did I do something wrong? Did I not perform in the interviews? I mean, I know from teaching, I don't know if it was the same when you did it, but your interview process is grueling. You have to deliver a mini lesson to a group of students you've never met before in a school where you don't know what the behavior is like. You don't know the setting. Yeah. You don't know if the tech works. You'd have to plug in your PowerPoint presentation and have your handouts. You printed at home and know you've got enough and you didn't forget or print the wrong one, or your presentation would work. And I remember that stress. And then you have a group interview and individual interviews. It's a whole day. When I did it, it was, a whole day in the school, sat in the staff room, worried, with a headache, with all this stress of what time am I doing my lesson, and what time have I got my group interview, and what time have I got my one-to-one, all that kind of, am I asking the right questions when we toured the school? Do they think I'm showing enough interest? Was it like that for you? Did you have to go through all that?
Little bits, but I wasn't even getting interviews. And there's so many people in my area that it was very hard to even get to interview stage. And I guess for anyone who knows teaching, when your first year in teaching, you need to do your newly qualified teaching year. So you're sort of down, I guess, a little bit sort of behind everyone else. Ideally, the schools basically didn't want, the new teachers. They wanted one who'd done their NQT year. So I wasn't even getting interviews, but I was going around schools, like you say, asking questions. Did they like me? So yeah, this was really confronting that kind of sense of worth. What am I doing wrong? What is it? And I think I was really sensitive for a few years, because certainly at that time teaching was seen as a guaranteed job, and people would joke around and be like, I can't believe you didn't get a job. I'm like, no, don't say that. That's exactly what, but it was triggering in me the same belief, wasn't it? Right. So this is a great insight into the fact that when we get triggered by something, it's really reflecting what's going on within ourselves. So it was a chance for me to look at my kind of judgments, my expectations on life. And I guess the squiggly career line that you talk about, this was the absolute epitome. I just got there very early. So in the end, after a year of doing little bits of supply teaching, I was working in a pub to try and keep my days open for supply teaching. I kind of went, enough is enough. I can't keep doing this. This isn't healthy for me. And I think that was one of the most empowering moments in my career, when I went, no, I can't do this, and I'm not going to carry on doing this, because I don't know why I should. And it was hard because I loved teaching and I felt a little bit guilty that I was walking away from helping people. But again, that was really good for me because that was about like how we can help people is in so many different ways in life. And yeah, so it was a tough year. And it probably took me a few years to kind of go. I think when my career got more established in data, I was able then to go, it's worked out fine.
Yeah.
But it probably took that 5-10 years, if I'm being really honest, to kind of be okay with it. I think.
But I mean, it's really great you made the decision, and that was kind of like when people make a decision, that's almost half the battle, isn't it? Making the decision. But once you've done it, you've just got to stick by it. But I can imagine if you thought that teaching was your identity, it was part of your identity of who you were growing up to be, to then the educational psychologist ultimately, but to then to have that taken away from you, part of your identity, you're having to then rebuild a new identity and be okay with that. I can imagine would be quite.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and what was really interesting, I managed to get like some temporary work in a housing association for a year. And then I got a job working in a council for Sure Start. And I don't know whether you know much about them, but Sure Start, I mean, again, this was the epitome of what I loved. It was working in areas of deprivation to really give children aged 0 to 4 a head start in life. It had all come from the US Head Start scheme, to give them a sure start in life and help, sort of education and really well-being outcomes. So I just loved it. But actually, what I found working in that environment, I'm just not really naturally a public sector kind of person. I work better in a much faster paced environment, which is why I love working where I am now, because it's very entrepreneurial and it's fast paced. So actually, in reality, although I had this thing where I was like, wow, I get to have a sure start, the reality of what I suited was like, it all came crashing down of like, well, I'm doing this thing that's really valuable to helping people, but I'm not happy. And I ended up moving out of that role after a couple of years. I'm going and working in mortgages. And I remember at the time having a conversation with someone, and I was like, I feel like I'm literally, and like my words were selling my soul, because to me, I'm now working in private sector. I'd started off with this really vocational journey of like helping people, and now I work in data in private sector, but I absolutely loved it. And I've been in the private sector now since 2007, and I've just thrived. And it's so interesting, those things around expectations about what you sort of should do, and actually what you really love doing. It's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. What is it? Is it the pace that you think makes you the challenge of working in private sector, or what is it you think that sort of made that shift?
Yeah, I think I definitely like seeing outcomes fairly quickly. I think looking back on my Sure Start days, I sort of, go figure, social change takes a while, right? So, I think you have to be exceptionally patient to really show up year after year, and it is worth it. It's like planting seeds, it does take a long time to really see that coming back. I think I like the private sector work because I like seeing results quickly.
Yeah.
But I think it's been the growth as well. Like I've technically learned a lot of things. And I've sort of flourished in the data world because it's very technical, and I've been able to learn lots of things. And growth's been a big thing for me, really around just pushing me there, because there is always something to learn, isn't there? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I think that's why the fast pace and the ability to learn have been really valuable for me.
Absolutely. So it's I guess if you were to reflect now on your career, it's quite an interesting one, in that if originally you were defining success as achieving this role to be an educational psychologist, you've got this really long career journey of just keep growing and keep improving, and that changed. You've done a lot of reflection, you've done a lot of decision making, you've definitely had this growth mindset where you just go out and learn and strive for the next thing and keep moving when you see that something doesn't line up. But now, how knowing what you know now and the journey that you've been on, how would you define what career success is to you?
Um, this is such a great question. And I think it encompasses a lot of different things. I think if I was going to use an overarching phrase, for me, it's about being in alignment. I think as a mum of two now, and I have like, incredible husband who is extremely involved in kind of childcare. So I feel like, that's had a massive impact on what I've been able to do from a career perspective, because it's that real kind of team collaborative approach. But I think having children has really, I guess, fine-tuned how I see certain things in my life, and that pull that can sometimes happen with I feel like at times it's like, am I choosing this over this in my life, like the children over the career, or the career over the children? But actually finding a different way that is in alignment with my values, and that will be really different for everybody. What is alignment for me isn't going to be alignment for someone else. And I think it's about, for me, it's been about walking the path that's right for me, not the path that should be walked or we're told that we should walk as a mother or a woman, or a father or a man, or whatever, whatever you kind of like identify with. I think walking your path, and that's where I think it's really inspiring seeing people, because it might be that no one's walked that path before and you've done it, and it's scary being a trailblazer. Sometimes it's lonely. But I think being in alignment for me is around that success, because I think it comes out in our bodies. I think that it also encompasses money, flexibility, growth, boundaries, relationships, and connection. Those are all things that are, for me, part of that alignment. So, for example, it's not about like kind of going, I don't care about money anymore. Like, I want to challenge myself as a woman, because I read things about kind of, pay. And I'm like, I don't want to, be paid less because I'm not challenging myself on that. So I think even working through money stories is a huge kind of part of being in alignment of, do I feel this is reflective of my skills, and challenging, even in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've picked up on so many things there, and yeah, 100%. I was actually doing a little diagram yesterday about all the things, when I think of being an empowered leader, and there was all the things at work, but then there's all the things outside, and you've touched on those. Having control over your finances is a big one. And like you say, an element of that is I might be the breadwinner in my family because I work in tech, and that's, we tend to earn more than other sectors. Therefore, if it's the woman or the parent that works in that sector, you're likely to be the breadwinner. Therefore, if you're paid differently simply because of your gender, then how can you be the same breadwinner for your family as somebody else in the same role, another organization, or in your same organization that is a male? They're more the breadwinner simply because they're male. So you're right, it is about that perception. But I think, I mean, you've drawn on so many things. It's great that you have that balance as a family and you have this team approach to your family life. I'm guessing by what you've said that what you're saying is, although it's a team approach, that doesn't mean you want to have a career and not have a family. You're saying, I still want to be a great mum, and I battled with that too. So thumbs up. You're killing it. You're doing it, having a career and still paying attention. And I was even reading an article the other day about the hidden work, the things that take part of your brain in processing the planning of the childcare, the planning of who's going to drop off, pick up, school uniform changes. All of this thing, I think, makes us incredibly productive and effective as parents, doing everything we have to do. And it sounds like, you've got this team effort doing it, which is great. And you're still making it work with your career. But 100% alignment of values. I mean, one of the key reasons when you talk to people about leaving, I know people say the number one reason people leave is because they're bosses, but when you really get down to the nitty gritty of why people have chosen to leave an organization, yes, it might be because they had a bad boss, but the reason is the boss did not align with their values. So the boss was maybe asking them to work extra hours, saying that the people that come in the office first and leave last are the people I value, when the reality is you still contributed the same, but you had a family commitment. So it rubbed up against your values, because I value this relationship at home with my child, who by the time they're 18 or 21, I still want to have a relationship with them. If I don't put the time in now, they won't know who I am. And I think we've spent too many years where dads, particularly because they've been a breadwinner, they've perhaps been expected to travel, work long hours, and had this sort of expectation of these sorts of types of bosses. They've not had the same relationships with their children. And I can see that in other generations and in people around me. And that's quite sad, I would say. That's quite upsetting. Children need role models. They need their mum and dad around. They need that supportive environment. And this whole thing, like you say, about your alignment of your values and what matters to you against the person you work with, respecting that and not rubbing up against it, I think is really, I completely can see everything you're talking about play out for a lot of our listeners and people that I've worked with.
Yeah, and it's interesting, talking about the kind of parenting side. My husband and I have talked about this loads over the years, but when I went back to work after I'd had my first child, and I was like, really excited about going back, and I decided to go back full time. My husband does shifts, so he was looking after our son 2 days a week, which was a really interesting journey for him to then be on his own with a child, very different. So that was great, but I was so triggered by and it was actually other women going, "Oh, you're going back to work full time," and it was like, bomb. But what I realized again through that journey was I had some things I needed to deal with around being a working mom that I didn't realize were there until I did it. And I think with that journey, again, hopefully this is helpful for somebody. I've got used to the conflict now. It's not that it's gone away. And it's not about, I think when we feel uncomfortable with something, it's easy just to kind of go, well, either push myself into this zone or that zone. But I think part of that third way of doing things is sitting into the discomfort and recognizing it. So I see a lot of that, the resistance is coming up really being about the social things that I've been, like cultural things that I've learned over the years. Like you said, the generation my parents grew up in, it was generally the man who was the breadwinner, who worked longer hours. So that became my normal, and that's what people did. And so when I did something different, it was like, oh, this isn't feeling right. And I think the journey of the values is that just because you've grown up with something doesn't mean you can't change it, and it's okay to challenge that. So things like you talked before about your bosses maybe asking you to work longer hours, so that would be an alignment around boundaries for me, around, do we feel comfortable saying no to somebody? Great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, this can be culturally accepted, can't it? So it might not be explicitly. I find this a lot. We've moved departments several times in our company, and what we've observed is that in some departments there is a mentality that I came in early and I'm going to leave on time, and I've done a good day's work, but I've got my boundaries. And then in other departments there is just a culture of nobody at 5 o'clock, nobody's getting up out of their seats. So if I'm the first person, everybody looks at me like, oh, you're going home already, you're part-time, what are you doing, you're leaving already, we're all staying. And then culturally, is it culturally, I don't know what the word is, but you sort of feel obliged to stay at your desk another 20 minutes or so until somebody starts to drift out the door. And then, but I mean, I know myself, I'm a 5 o'clock, I have to go. And if I have to log back on later and do something, I have to, because I have children to pick up, and I have a deadline of 6 p.m. to get both of them from their respective places through traffic. So it's made me very strict with my boundaries. But I also know that even if it's not explicitly stated to us, you observe the normal behavior around you, and you try to fit in.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And it made me remember actually when I first went back to work after having my son, the comments I would get, and they were jokey comments, but it was like, oh, part-timer. Okay, and based on, and I was working full time, I was doing the same hours as them, it's just that I had a bit more flexibility agreed.
Yeah.
And I guess this is a challenge for everyone, isn't it? It's really about supporting people in different areas of their life, that it can seem like a joke on the, on the like surface, but actually inside, parents are juggling a lot. So support your parents.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and anybody who's got anything going on, who could have health issues, they've got a parent, they might have had an issue with the travel to work. There's all sorts of things. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and whilst you might think optimism isn't, optimism versus realism, but one of the key things I love about him is this idea of empathy. So, that person that's walked into the meeting 2 minutes late, so the meeting started at 8:30 and they've turned up at 32 minutes past 8. But I know they've got 4 children and a wife and they've turned up 2 minutes late, but I don't know what they've had to contend with this morning. I don't know if a child's been poorly, and we've had this situation 2 weeks ago. We had to negotiate who's going to stay out with my daughter. She has a temperature, and during COVID times, nobody goes anywhere with a temperature. Yeah. Everybody stays home, and we're negotiating who's going to stay home, and that really, Dave, you should also stay home because you can't go anywhere. No one can go anywhere. And it becomes a very stressful situation. When you arrive at work, you try to engage, you try to, whatever's happened during that morning, but there will some people who won't have very much to contend with, and there'll be other people who've had an awful journey. I think I was talking to somebody as well, actually, a few weeks ago. Obviously in India, they've got quite a few COVID cases. And this is an Indian person whose family lives in India, and their work has not even acknowledging the fact that they have this incredible trauma going on at home and this worry, and just there's nothing said about it. And it's kind of one of those, well, that actually, how would any of my team fall into that bracket? Have I thought about it? And it's only by becoming more consciously aware, isn't it, as leaders, that we can start to empathize more. And I personally, I don't know about you, but I think being a mum or being a parent, full stop, makes you more empathetic and start to see the whole person. Yeah. Pre that, I would be a workaholic and I would be like, yeah, I'm in early. Yeah, I'm doing this. But post that, you have a whole new perspective on people.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that, I remember you sharing that kind of, the instance of India, I think in something you've done recently this week that I've seen on LinkedIn. And it really challenged me actually to think, am I checking in with my team enough? We were all working remotely at the moment, so it was really, I think it's so helpful because I think I'm a fairly empathetic person, but it is still really easy to get lost in the busyness of each day.
It is, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, I too have received those comments. I've heard those comments about, you're part-timer, and joking about people being late for meetings, always being late and things, or in the morning or in the evening rushing off. And I'm with you on this. On the face of it, it kind of seems like banter, but we all know how dangerous that can be, and we don't know what people have got going on in their personal lives. And I think we just need to be more mindful of our language and not say it. just not. If privately, I'm a firm believer in privately with your team, asking if everything's okay. Even colleagues looking out for each other and asking if everything's okay, and genuinely meaning it. That if something's okay, I'm not going to do anything about it unless you want me to. I'm not going to help unless or tell anybody else unless you want me to. But having that conversation, I think. I can think there's many situations that have been diffused or at least become clear, and then I know it's not a performance issue simply by asking, isn't it?
Yeah, the connection is great.
Brill. Now, so one of the things I was going to ask you about is what drives you. So you're obviously really motivated. You could have had that knock back in your career early on, and you could have said, you know what, I'm just not going to have a career. I'm not going to do anything out there. I'm not going to go and strive for anything. I'm not going to keep growing, learning something new and pivot. What do you think is it that drives you?
The word for me is growth. Absolutely, fundamentally that. And I think it's really interesting reflecting on my career and where I haven't grown as much. The growth piece has really kind of kept me going, like through each stage of the journey. I get bored really easily, so like I'm a very restless individual. So that it's almost like this. It's like kind of higher self, I suppose, of going, no, actually, you don't just contain yourself here. I just know now that I will always keep growing. So I always hated those questions you'd get asked. What do you want to do in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't. That just doesn't resonate with me. When I've looked at actually how can I grow now? Like, what would excite me? What do I want to learn? How do I want to grow now? That has served me really well. I was listening to your recent kind of webinar presentation to, is it Her and Data? And you did one that you released recently. And in that, you talked about the formula that you had in your mind of hard work plus long hours equals success. And that resonated with me so much because I had that formula sort of deep down in me as well. My way of dealing with that was to go, I'll do the hard work, but I don't want to do the long hours. Therefore, I can't be successful. And so I'm going to go, actually, I only want to go this far. I never want to go into management, right? Because that would be, I'd have to do long hours. It would be stressful. All of these underlying stories. Fortunately, there was something deeper in me that was like, just take a next step, just grow a bit more. And then eventually I was like, had this cap on the management thing. No, I don't want to do management. And in the end, I was like, I do. And the point at which I started taking the limits off, because you just don't stop growing, do you? Like, nature doesn't stop growing. It's actually really harmful for us to kind of try and hold ourselves back because we're really not designed for that. And so growth as a thing that drives me has served me really well. So I don't necessarily know what that will look like in 10 years exactly, but I know I will have grown. And so I think now in my career, I'm more comfortable with the unknown and just taking it a bit at a time. That's kind of where my head is at with that.
Yeah, it sounds like you knew you had a lot more potential and you were like, I'm going to limit myself because I don't want to do that, but I know I've got this potential and I can do it. And because I know I can do it, I really want to do it and I really want to grow and I really want to, progress.
I mean, even things like technically, about sort of 7 or 8 years ago, the thought of designing data warehouses, was terrifying. And then I got this opportunity and it was a bit like, well, you're kind of, my boss had done a little bit. And then I got this opportunity to really sort of start it from scratch, almost like, and build the foundation. And he's like, off you go. He was very much a very kind of gregarious, just try it, just do it kind of mentality, which was really helpful for me. And now, I can design data warehouses in my sleep. It's really, I'm like, why was I ever, just creating a table? It's no big deal. But that's kind of how far I've come in those, 6 or 7 years. And I think once you do that a few times, you realize that you're always going to feel the fear. You're always going to feel the resistance, but you've been through it and there's something better the other side. And I think, again, once you've done that a couple of times, it's like, okay, cool, there's some resistance here. That means to lean into it. That's where I need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, brilliant. And it sounds good that you had somebody who encouraged you to try and fail and it's okay, we'll keep trying and you'll figure it out. And that encourager.
Yeah, and it, in a weird way, not hand-holding encouragement. Actually, I was really challenged by a couple of my bosses around that time who were just like, over to you. And I'm like, no, I can't do this by myself. I'd always had that kind of caring boss, or a boss there that would be the kind of, almost like, they almost become a parent figure, don't they? And then I had these bosses that were like, just get on with it, that those were the moments that were really good for me that I found very hard, but they made me step up. Yeah,
I've kind of got two thoughts with that. One, they must have seen it in you, they must have seen your potential. But two, there's not, being a leader, that's really brave. You kind of, from my story, I would hold back a lot. I would be like, no, I'll prep it all. And then I'll give you the really prescriptive bit that you can do. And I would always protect people. And I had to really let go and sort of be like, no, it's okay. I can, but I can't imagine ever throwing something at somebody that they've never done before and being okay with just letting them completely, hands off. I guess I guess senior leaders have to do that to a certain degree, and maybe that's the next step is yeah, completely hands off, throw
I
somebody
don't-
at the deep
It's
end. But
it's interesting because I don't think it always works very effectively. I'm not saying that they did it in a really kind of intentional way. It was just it
Nikki's
was
doing, you can do it.
just what it wasn't like, if someone had given you a leader's handbook, that probably isn't some of the stuff that happened, probably wasn't in the leadership handbook. And it's interesting when people say I'm leaving because of a boss, because I often think actually there's probably some stuff there which is really around you stepping up. The fact that you've come up against this boss who is triggering you in some way, there's maybe a bit about them that you want to be like. And that was the things that came out for me, was actually I wanted to step up. I wanted to be more of a leader. I wanted to be, sort of shining more. But I would, was in that zone in my life where I was like, no, the limits are this is how far you can go, and now you've reached it. And then I just kind of had a massive breakthrough. And I remember being on maternity leave with my daughter, so my second child, and this was a huge moment. And I was like, up to then when I'd looked for jobs, I'd always kind of gone, this is the salary that I would be able to get, this is the maximum salary. So literally in the job search it would be this type of job, maximum salary. And I remember having this eureka moment where I was like, what if I flipped this round, and what's the minimum salary I would go for, and if I take the maximum off?
Yeah.
And that's, ever since I've done that, when I've looked for jobs, I've done that, and I've flipped it around. And that was a huge moment for me, because that was about me taking the limits off and going, what would I need to be there? Because then you see the potential and the opportunity. And that, again, going back to the growth, I might not be there yet, but maybe I'll be there in 3 years. And what do I need to do to get there? But it's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. That is really good, and probably a little bit more motivating than there's my max. Well, my max is kind of
Yeah.
I just pitched it there. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, isn't it, about goals is quite often we don't dream big enough. So therefore there's not a big enough incentive. Why do all that hard work when my goal is just like to make a marginal improvement to my life, but I'm going to put in all this extra effort and really have to pull it out of me and step out of my comfort zone? You've really got to have that pull, haven't you, to something that's really appealing. Definitely. So what I'd really love to know next, Nicki, what's going to be next in your career journey?
So it's all around the mentoring and coaching for me. I think that, I've started Empowered Analysts a few years ago, which is my training and sort of development business for analysts. Because I really understand how challenging it can be to be a data professional. I was on a roundtable event presenting yesterday afternoon, and it was so interesting hearing people who were sort of early in their career around the challenges of, what do I learn next? Is it the technical, and the challenges of, well, what happens when what the business needs and what the stakeholder wants isn't aligned, and being in the kind of the cauldron of that. And so, the kind of mentoring that I'm looking at doing in my business is really what I want to lean into. And I've been on such a journey with that already the last 3 years or so. And because I think when you do that, you can have all this experience, but actually sitting back and really refining it and distilling it, to share with people, and that thought leadership around it. So I appreciate there's a journey there, and probably similar to the things that you're doing with Empowered Leaders. Really helping people you've literally gone through it yourself, like you get it.
Yeah, come from knowing.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. You know that from when you're working with a client who works in doing something that you've experienced, but you also know that when you're listening to other people out there in the field, whether they've come straight through an academic route, for example, and their experience is very different than in private sector, for example. You can, come from knowing is, if you can find somebody to, mentor, coach you, like Nicki, who works and does the thing that you want to do and has been through those challenges, then 100% go with somebody who's been there, who comes from knowing, definitely. I don't know how you feel about that, but do you class yourself as working in IT, tech, or data, or just like all of the above?
Ooh, so that's a really good question. I might go off on a little one here. I absolutely don't see myself in IT. So I feel really passionately, oh, you can tell I'm passionate about this. I absolutely think that a data function data is owned by everyone in the business.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, I feel like I need another phrase, but the kind of business intelligence or your data and analytics function for me is a very, very separate skill set to IT. And I think to kind of respect the industries, the kind of like the skill sets both have. Even within what I would classify as like a traditional IT, there's a lot of different things you need to know. I really, really believe that I'm more in that kind of data and analytics world because there's so many different components to it of what we need to learn to be more effective to help the business to drive value through the reporting and analytics. I'm very much pitched in that that view. I'm open to different opinions.
My challenge has always been we're so heavily dependent on IT projects being done right for the data governance and all that kind of stuff and the data quality, but also for the business projects and process to be done right, because we're in the receiving end, aren't we? We're downstream of all this. But then you also have the concept of infrastructure and managing a data warehouse, and traditionally that would sit in a tech function. But I can see, I can sense your points.
I feel like they're twins. They're like kind of they seem very similar on the surface, but they are different individuals, and I think we should kind of respect them as such. It's that, but we need to be sitting alongside really closely with IT because of, like you say, some of the things that you talked about, and very, very closely with the business. We need to be living and breathing the business problems and really kind of understanding what problems we're solving. It's learning lots of different skills, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, maybe it's because my route was teacher, developer, project manager, business analyst, and then into BI, that maybe I still identify a bit as being in tech and IT and data, so I kind of sit along the fences. Really, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Nicki, today, and sharing, your story. There's so many elements I think that will, people will really get value from, and really think and reflect on certainly the values, aligning your values with your career, with what you're doing, what you want to do, what matters to you in different stages of your life. I think it's incredibly important. And like you touched on, you've got to be okay with it. If you're a career person, I was exactly like this, didn't want to give up my career to have children. I wanted both. Make it work for you. Figure out what are the values that are going to really make it work. Have your boundaries. Oh, you know what? I used to work through my lunch, and Nicki will probably tell you she did the same. Then you have a commitment where you have to leave at a certain time and fetch children or do whatever because you've got another commitment. And you know what? It doesn't make a difference to the quality of your work. It doesn't make a difference to your commitment to do a fantastic job, to grow, learn, develop a team. Your projects still get delivered. Everything's still awesome because you make it so. It is incredibly important. How can people connect with you and find out more about you, Nicki?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you put Empowered Analysts in, you should be able to find me. And you can also email me, Nicki@empoweredanalysts.com, if you want to just kind of reach out and say hi. I'd love to hear from you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Nicki. And thank you to everyone for listening. I will speak to you again next week for the next podcast. See you soon. Bye.